Welcome to a new series on Scrolling to Death called Teachers Talk. So this is where I have candid discussions with teachers and administrators. The goal is to give parents the real deal on what's happening with our kids and their screens at school. What I'm learning is shocking, and parents need to tune in so that we can better support our kids in their education. Tell me your name and what grade you teach.
So my name is Dean Bavisotto. I teach 12th grade English. So I work with seniors, and I work in a first-ring suburb outside of the city of Buffalo. And it's Amherst and Tonawanda are the names of the suburbs. We're kind of split between those two. Amherst tends to be a little bit wealthier of a suburb, and then Tonawanda just a little bit less wealthy. But they built a bunch of Section 8 affordable housing in Amherst. So we have seen like sort of a demographic shift across our district. And we've also taken in like an influx of refugee students. So we have a lot of L students at our school as well. I just feel like that's like, maybe useful context.
Yeah, for sure. Are smartphones allowed in your school and in your classroom?
So yes, they are allowed in our school. They are also allowed in my classroom. I have really struggled to like set boundaries around that. In the beginning of the year, we did this whole activity where I made them do like an experiment about sort of the myth of multitasking. And I tried to get kids off their smartphones through the like, I'm going to give you information and I want you to want to do the right thing method. And that just did not work because, just because you like have the information doesn't mean you have practiced the skill. So I think like I tried to provide the knowledge for why I wanted them to put their phones away, but I don't think I built in enough like practice with that skill. So all year I've sort of struggled to have kids use them appropriately. And then the other thing I wanted to say about are they allowed in our school? So they are allowed in our school, but enough teachers have like been struggling so much that next year they are implementing a new policy where they are no longer allowed in classrooms. So that will be like a big adjustment. And I think all of us are excited and terrified for how that's going to go.
Yeah. How does implementation look? Are they going to collect them at the front office or are they going to require them just to be out of sight?
Pretty much out of sight is like, we haven't gotten a ton of guidance on it yet because their idea was we're going to roll this out during summer school this year and try to like work out the kinks.
Yeah.
But so far it is not going to be a collect them at the door situation. It's going to be a they need to be away situation. And then some teachers have floated like maybe for not problem students. I just mean kids who are struggling to keep them away. Maybe there's they turn it in at the office. But I think our admin is really worried that parents are not going to support this because a district in the suburb over from where we teach recently had this battle and the parents like freaked out and they were like, no, you will not take my kid's phone away. So I think our principal is convinced that like this, we're not going to have parental support and that's why we shouldn't collect them. And I know a lot of teachers also are thinking like, I don't want it to be on me to take the phone away because it's going to create like volatile reactions.
Yep.
So I think in general, we're like hoping that admin kind of takes that part of it on, but we don't really know how it's going to roll out yet.
Yeah. This is just crazy. I mean, I hear the same exact things from every teacher. Yeah, parents will be the pushback. Parents want to get a hold of their children all day long about things like, what do you want for dinner? Nothing emergent. And they expect them to answer. So that's going to be the barrier.
It's frustrating. I can have empathy. Like we live in the era of school shootings. So like, at least I like am trying to appreciate what it must be like for a parent to be like, what do you mean I'm not going to be able to get a hold of my kid when my child's entire life, I've been able to get a hold of them all the time. So like, I'm trying to be empathetic about it, but I do think parents aren't, because they're not in the classroom with us, they're not seeing the degree to which it is like destroying their child's education.
Yeah. And I'm going to do a section on the school shooting situation. I think there's just a lack of understanding that if the kid has a phone on them in a school shooting situation, it actually puts them in more danger because the phone's making noise. The phone is lighting up. I mean, if there's a shooter comes into a classroom, a dark classroom, and a light shines, that shooter is going to shoot at that light.
Yep. I have like tried to explain that to my kids. Like I've tried to say to them, if you are someone who's like, I need this for safety, like I need you to understand that all of us calling 911 at the same time or your phone going off is like not bringing you safety. But again, I just think that the addiction is so strong that it sort of feels like it doesn't really matter what words I say. There needs to be like skill practice or nothing is really changing.
Well, and you can't really expect, because of, we all know their brains aren't fully developed and like they don't have the ability to regulate themselves.
Right.
And so we just have to hold their hand through that experience.
Right. And I want to do that. I just like don't know how to do it, you know?
Yeah. And I would say, since you guys are just implementing next year, that you and the teachers should be like, we need support from you, the admin. We need either a pouch system on the wall that kids drop the phones in.
A lot of people have advocated for that.
Yeah. Because having to, like, letting them have it on their person or in their backpack or wherever, even if it's like has to be in a zipped pocket, you're still going to have to be regulating that the whole time.
Right. The police know that.
I've spoken with like dozens of teachers that don't have a phone ban at their school, or they do, but it's like up to each teacher to figure it out. They always end up struggling, and then they do the pouches, which is a little bit better, but the kids' focus is still, it's hard for them to focus when their phone is not on them. So there's also just like, but it's a better solution.
Right.
Tell me about specific problems that smartphones cause in your classroom.
So I teach English. My students' like ability to write or read anything that is longer than like a paragraph is just completely gone. The attention span issue really affects my content area. I'm sure all of them, but like, my content area, I feel like, I basically feel like all of my students are half paying attention to everything in their life. Like they are just constantly doing like 9 different things at once. And so they just like completely miss most of the information that they need. And then they're just constantly asking me to repeat things, which is really frustrating. I also feel like the quality of the work that they're producing is just abysmal, because it's like, how can I do the least possible so that I can get back to scrolling as soon as I can? So I even feel like even the kids that are like, I always complete my work, it's like, let me complete my work the crappiest, it doesn't matter to me. I just need to get it done so that I can go back to my phone. And I've found that like, because I have not made like a no phones in here whatsoever, there's nothing that they can focus on without just trying to like get back to that like dopamine hit as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's it's the span of time that they can focus. And then it's also like the amount of effort that they're willing to put in. Which is really scary. And then I also just think like, because of the kinds of things that they're reading and doing on those phones, like I could be doing cartwheels in the front of the room. Nothing is going to be as interesting to them as their TikTok feed. So it just kind of feels like it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to be as interesting or provocative as like whatever they're looking at. And then also, because I'm English, like one of the things that I teach is research and research papers. And I have just seen this explosion in like children and kids believing like out there conspiracy theories that used to be like very fringe and are now just like more and more percentage of my students are interacting with that stuff and believing it.
Yeah.
And their ability to sort through like correct and incorrect information is kind of gone. When they were mentioning that possible TikTok ban that's kind of happening, like I had so many students being like, but they're keeping real information from us. The only way that we're finding out about it on TikTok is on TikTok. And no matter how many times I tried to be like, we have independent journalism, like nothing that has been verified is not going to be carried on every major news network. Like TikTok is not, the only way you're going to find out real verified information. It just feels like it's falling on deaf ears. Like a lot of the like things I'm trying to teach them, because A, they're half paying attention to me. And then B, because, that clickbait is just always going to be more interesting. That conspiracy theory is always going to be more interesting than the truth.
Yeah.
So they're kind of uninterested in like learning the gray, boring, nuanced reality than they are to just kind of believe that conspiracy that used to be fringe.
Yeah, one of the teachers talked about like, I'm having to try to convince kids that the Earth's not flat. Like,
yes. No, and even kids even, and like, okay, part of this is age appropriate, where sometimes it's like this little bit of immaturity where they'll make jokes about certain conspiracies and I'll find myself having a reaction where I'm like, that's not funny because thousands of people believe that. So sometimes I have to remember like, okay, this is literally a teenager. They probably don't actually believe that. They're just repeating it as a joke. But sometimes I'm having these reactions where I'm like, if I didn't know that half the country believed that, I would be able to laugh at that. But I can't. Right? Like I sort of frequently will mention, just as an example, sort of election denialism, because like democracy is really important to me. And I want to make sure that my students hear me say over and over, there was not mass voter fraud in the 2020 election. It's irrelevant who you support politically. That is an objective truth. But I just will hear so many kids like make jokes about the deep state or whatever it is. And I'm like terrified because I don't know what they actually believe or if they have the skills to fact check those things, which I'm trying to teach them.
Yeah.
But because they're half paying attention to everything and putting so little effort into their schoolwork, even when I design like what I think is a really interesting lesson where I had them go to a social media site, find a video, and then fact check what was in that video, they were all just screenshotting it and sending it to each other and all turning in the same thing and like not really doing the work. So it feels like the smartphones are facilitating the regular cheating that has always happened. That's not a new problem, right? But now the ability for them to screenshot answers and then send it to their entire class so that only one person does the work is just like amplified from maybe what it was when I was in high school.
Yeah. It's crazy we've gotten this far with even allowing them to have the smartphones in this year. Like, this is crazy that it took this long.
And I feel like I was that teacher that I was like, the solution is not taking them away. And now that I've been in the classroom, I'm like, I had no idea what I was talking about. Like, I think I just thought that we were like, I think I was like, no, we want to teach them how to use these tools. And then like it started to set in for me that like the tool is just too powerful to have them being doing other stuff.
They can't resist the toy. Like, they're treating it as a toy, not a tool.
Right.
And if it was just, that's why I always advocate for like Simple Phones and Kid Safe Phones, all these different companies that make them, because it only does what you want it to do. So if parent, you want to get a hold of your child, get them a phone that just texts and GPS locates them so you know where they are and you're good. But when you're sending iPhones with these kids that can't be locked down in the right way, that's not doing the trick. It's too distracting.
Right.
You said so many interesting things there. Kids, you're not going to lose your TikTok. It's a national security issue. I'm sure you understand that. If needed, an American company is going to buy TikTok and still be around. But hopefully it goes away. I'm cool with that. But
Me too.
But it's such an interesting thing because you're proving that it is so influential on these young kids' minds in developing their whole political ideology and social ideology and all their opinions. So a Chinese company is able to, all in one click, basically influence all these American teenagers to believe one thing. And that's not okay. Like, let's just be clear.
And I tried to make the connection for them between like some of the Russian interference in the 2016 election. Like, I was trying to tell them like Russia did not hack Facebook to do this. They just used Facebook the way that it is made, you know, in order to have this type of influence. So like, here's what they're talking about when they're talking about these like national security issues. It's also just so contentious. Like, even when I'm saying something like that, I'm worried some kid's parent is going to come at me for being like anti-conservative or something, which I'm not.
Yeah.
So that I almost think is a thing too, where the smartphones, like you had mentioned, some of that like political polarization that's happening. I'm also trying to kind of bring up in my class, and I teach 12th graders, so I feel a little bit safer doing this, where I'm like, you guys are mature-ish or more mature. Try to be like, you know, this has nothing to do with like any specific political ideology. This is like democracy at stake, and all of your ability to critically think about the information that you're getting, you know, is being eroded.
Yeah, and understanding how much misinformation and disinformation, understanding the difference, and then just taking that into account and everything with a grain of salt. And who are you listening to, and how do they know that? You know, all of those things. Okay, so I wanted to ask, how much less learning, if you had to try to quantify it, is being done due to the smartphones in the classroom?
Oh my God. So much. When you say try to quantify it, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like,
Yeah, like how many minutes or hours per day
okay.
would you get back? Will you get back, right? If they were out of the classroom.
I think genuinely half. Like out of my 40-minute class period, I feel like kids are
Mhm.
focusing for a minute, not focusing for 3, focusing for 2 minutes, not focusing for 4. So like I genuinely feel like I would probably get 50% to like 70% of my class period being actually learning if they weren't just half paying attention to everything they're doing and everything I'm saying.
Mhm. And so just to get the answer straight, would you prefer smartphones to be banned in your school?
Yes, because then it would not be on me. Like you said, I think right now it's kind of based on teacher, and the kids do think of it as like, this teacher's cool because they let us XYZ, this teacher's not.
Yes.
Instead of like, we're all just trying to help you. So yeah, I think if it was a little bit less on me to be the bad guy,
Mhm.
then maybe they would, or maybe almost if it was a school-wide rule, they might believe me more when I try to talk about why we have it.
Mhm.
If it wasn't just a rule in my classroom. And I do think I tried to like be too lenient where I was like, no, I'm going to teach you guys how to put it away. And now I'm like,
Mhm.
it's not that I actually say this like at least once a week. I say it's not that you guys are weak. It's that they have hacked our psychology. Nobody
True.
is like stronger than their phone's ability to get their attention. It's has nothing to do with like a weakness on your part.
Yes, agree. Do all of the kids have iPhones, or does anyone have like a dumb phone or a kid-friendly phone or a watch or anything like that
A lot of my kids have Apple Watches.
in addition to their phone?
Right. I don't think I have a single kid who has a dumb phone. Last year when I taught summer school, I did have one ninth grader who told me he didn't have a phone, but that's the only kid that I've ever encountered without a phone. I think every single other of my students has a smartphone. At least in my 12th graders, they all do.
Yeah. Okay. Are you aware if they're on social media, what platforms do they share that with you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of, in the beginning of the year, I did a get to know you thing, and then we did a whole like social media unit recently where we watched The Social Dilemma. So I did ask them these questions. Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok were the most popular apps, and then followed closely behind by YouTube.
Okay.
I also had them do like a scale of 0 to 10. How concerned are you about your social media use?
Mhm.
And I had them do that before we watched that the Social Dilemma documentary and after. Pretty much
Yeah.
all of them fell between that like 4 to 8 range. And then I had like some outliers that put themselves at a 10.
Mhm.
And I had a couple kids that put themselves at a 1 or 2. The data didn't really seem to change after watching the video.
Hmm.
And I think one of the hardest things for me was like watching them scroll mindlessly during the movie and not pay attention to it. That was like really upsetting to me. And scary. I even did like the second day that we watched it, I did like I want you all to challenge yourself, put your phone away for 40 minutes. If
Mhm.
you can't do that, like there's nothing on earth that you shouldn't be able to avoid for 40 minutes that you don't have an addiction to.
Right.
So I did like okay, real talk. If you can't do this for 40 minutes, like you need to have a serious like conversation with yourself. You have an addiction to your phone.
Mhm.
And then I also did like if you're sitting there saying, I could put it away, I just don't care. That's what addicts say. You need to think about that.
Yeah.
So I did like try to have those conversations. And that first day that I did that, I think that was like
Mhm.
the least phone use during class that I had seen. But then the very next day and for the rest of the movie, it was like I had never said that at all.
Of course. Okay. So when it comes to social media and their use, do you feel like their experiences are generally positive? Are you getting any vibe on that, or is it causing drama?
Oh my God. So I taught 8th grade for a couple months, and I did notice it a little bit more then, where Mondays in particular were like
Mm.
horrible days at school because things had happened over social media over the weekend, and then they would bring it into school on Mondays.
Mhm.
So there were like fights, and they were often on Mondays, like physical fights.
Oh my
At
God.
this school, I think because of the age of my kids, it's a little bit less of things that are coming into the classroom from social media. But I have had
Okay.
like more than one student, actually one just this last Friday, kind of tell me like, I've been skipping your class because these kids have been like posting and saying things about me on social media right after class, and it like gives me anxiety. So I've been skipping your class to avoid that from happening. There was also like text messaging that was going on, and group chats are also like I think a big problem, but definitely
Mm-hmm.
had specifically mentioned Instagram.
Okay. Yep. So when it comes to the smartphone use, anything you would request of the parents, like if you could address parents directly with the smartphone problem, what would you say?
The number one thing would be kind of what you mentioned in the beginning. Like there have been many times when I've been like, hey, can you put your phone away? And the person will be like, I'm texting my mom. And sometimes I just want to be like, please don't text your child during class. Obviously, emergencies happen.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. But like the fact that parents are texting their kids during class kind of confuses me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would say like, yeah, don't your child can't resist that notification. So wait to send the message until you know they're at lunch or it's after school hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think my other thing would be sort of the sleep deprivation. Like I have been reading a lot about what experts are saying, which is like keep the phone out of the bedroom. And I asked my students, I had them do a survey before we watched that documentary that was, how often did you stay up too late on a screen? And that was like I got like a very high, that happens to me very often response.
Yeah.
So I think I would want parents to say to their kids, like, your phone needs to be away when you're doing schoolwork, because it will take you 3 times as long if you're picking up your phone every 30 seconds to just get that stupid assignment done faster.
Mm-hmm.
Also to pay more attention to it. And then also I would think,
there'll be errors.
right, you're half paying attention. And then I think my other thing would be to keep kids from staying up so late, communicating with friends or scrolling on social media, so that when they get to school, they're not like falling asleep during class because they're exhausted.
Yeah. Okay. Those are very common. I've heard those two things all the time.
Yeah.
Anything you would request directly to your school district related to the smartphones?
This is like something that I almost feel like if I heard myself say this 5 years ago, I would be like, you sound like a tyrant. That's not the way.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of think that social media sites should just be blocked when you're on school grounds, to just sort of take away like just one, and they'll get around it. They'll make VPNs, they'll do whatever. But I just think that if they had less access to social media during class and they knew like, I'm not going to bother because I know I'm not going to be able to get onto my account, that might help them avoid some of those temptations like during class time.
Yeah.
And just in general, like being a teenager is hard enough with bullying. We don't need social media making it worse, where it's like you took a picture of me and posted it, during the school day, and now the kid's having a meltdown or a crisis during the school day because it's happening during the school day.
There's so much functionality in these social media profiles, and especially Snapchat, that feeds on their insecurities and really creates more drama.
Yes.
They just reported on Snapchat's like ranking system. Like they have like a top 8 ranking system. They have an upgrade, like you can pay for Snapchat Plus to find out where you rank on another person's profile.
The one other thing I'll add is that I constantly will see students like FaceTiming during classes, and they're like, why are you asking me to put it away? Like, we're not even talking. We're just on FaceTime. And that like boggles my mind. It'll often be like a girlfriend or a boyfriend or like my friend from out of state or whatever. And it'll be like, I'm not distracted. We're just on FaceTime for the entire school day. And it's like, what? Like, I don't even know how to respond to that, where I'm like, okay, well, if you're not even talking, then you don't need to be on this FaceTime call. But some of them, when I was asking them to pull up their like screen time tracker and like fill out a thing about like, where are you spending all of your time? How many hours per week are you spending? I had kids with 50 or more hours per week. And then I had kids they were like, well, this isn't an accurate metric because I just sit on FaceTime with my boyfriend like all day. So, and I would be like, okay, so you were still on FaceTime. How is that not accurate? But I almost want parents to know that that's happening too. It's not even just the like, I'm texting or I'm on social media. It's also like, I'm actively on a video call all day.
I noticed that with one of the babysitters that was babysitting my kids. She was just like, she was on a call for like 2 hours. And I think it was that. I think it was just like having it on in the background, observing each other's lives. Like I was like, honey, you can't like be on a call for 2 hours when you're watching my kids.
Like, I'm trusting you with my literal children. Like, I don't, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, it's weird. That's an interesting observation. Okay, so just straight up, do smartphones belong in the classroom?
I'm going to say no. I really think that when I first entered the field, I was like, yes, because when I'm reading a book, I'm constantly Googling historic references I didn't understand, words I didn't know, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm just feeling like, no, the draw to all those other things is way too tempting and distracting. If they need a dictionary, they've got that on their school issued device. They don't need a phone and they can't do social media on their phone. So
Mm-hmm.
I think no, it's bad for social issues and it's also bad for like your actual learning.
Yeah. Okay. So school issued devices. So do students at your school have individual school issued devices?
Yes, they have iPads.
iPads. Okay. They have like a keyboard with it?
No.
Or it's just...
It's the worst for English ever. They have no keyboard.
Yeah.
It's the English department has been sort of saying like, you guys are like tying our hands behind our backs for years. And I think it's like the school district just has this contract with Apple. And I even asked the IT guy about it once, and he said, because the kids get their iPads at like kindergarten now, in order to replace everyone's in the district with even just a different device, like a Chromebook or whatever, it would be so expensive that it's like no one wants to make any changes. The iPads are terrible. Like they're not good for like school use.
No. When do they type?
They're like barely functionable. They type on this keyboard that pops up, but like I can't even describe to you like, here's just a specific thing I'm dealing with right now because my kids are doing research papers. Like part of both APA and MLA format is hanging indents. You literally can't do that on an iPad. So I'm like trying to prepare my kids for college, and a hanging indent is like a really visually obvious thing that your professor will be like, I can tell this isn't formatted correctly just by looking at it. I literally can't show them how to do hanging indents because the iPad doesn't do it.
Yeah. Okay. That sucks.
Yeah.
I've not heard any high schoolers. I've only heard Chromebooks for high school.
Yeah. iPad.
Also, when you write something and it's a paragraph, you're supposed to indent that first word of the first. Correct? Is that correct? Okay.
Yep. Yes, you are. They can.
Okay. Is that in email? Would you say to do that? My husband and I have this argument all the time. Do you do that in emails too? Would you say?
I don't.
Okay.
So my understanding is that an email format follows a friendly letter format.
Okay.
And you don't necessarily have to do that for a friendly letter. Also, just formatting is changing. And so if you're doing academic writing, you indent, but you'll see like a lot of news articles don't. So I think it's fine to kind of do away with that over email.
Okay. But it doesn't bother you if someone did. You would be like, okay.
No, that would not bother
just
me.
A little more formal. Okay.
Yeah.
It bothers me. Okay. So they take them home, I'm assuming, as well, the iPads.
Yes.
Have you seen any parents opting out of either the school issued device altogether or taking it home?
No, I have never heard of that. I think probably the parents would be like, this is going to screw my kid over because there's always homework, there's always this, there's that. So I have not heard of like a single parent across any grade levels opting not to.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Do you feel that learning through their technology at school is as effective as like face-to-face hand-to-paper lessons?
No. So part of my master's thesis was kind of related to like typing versus handwriting. So like at least for English, we know that there is less recall when you are reading on like a limitless page. We basically learned through the research that reading is very spatial and you do actually recall things better when they are in a like static place on the page. So if you're reading with one of those e-readers, that's a little bit better for recall because if you were to turn that page back, the paragraph's going to be in the same place it was the first time you read that page. But like I think increasingly we're using, and sometimes I use them because I can find them availably for free, like PDFs and things like that. When you've got that like endless scroll, there's actually less recall with your reading.
Yeah.
And then similarly with writing, right? Like we have been able to determine that pushing down a key is a much quicker and like less labor intensive process than like writing out a letter. So you do have better recall when you handwrite as opposed to type. There's like some nuances there where you can like type more words more quickly. And if you review those notes, you might get like similar recall than if you had handwritten.
Okay.
But handwriting forces you to like synthesize and then put into shorthand. So you end up retaining more information that way.
Interesting.
So like if I ever need my students to remember something, I make them handwrite it on paper. Sometimes I will tell them, we're doing this digitally, but you have to handwrite with your finger rather than type. But they're like pretty resistant to that. So if I really want them to handwrite something because it's notes, I just print it and I make them do it with pen and paper.
Good. Okay. Where are they at with the quality of their handwriting?
So I'm just before we were speaking, I was grading something, and like if I showed you like some of the writing from 12th graders, like I think you would probably think it was like literally first grade. It's so illegible, and I feel like I am someone who's actually really good at reading like poor handwriting. It's like beyond illegible. Like they just don't have that practice. And sometimes I'm like, I can't even read this to grade it. I don't want to make a kid feel bad. So it's kind of like a hard thing where I want to be like, I need you to write more clearly. One time I did have one student when I was student teaching where my cooperating teacher told me, this kid is not allowed to handwrite. I cannot read his writing. So even if everybody's handwriting, that kid needs to type. I can't read his writing. So like it's pretty bad. I have graded Regents exams before, and there have been times when I've been like, I literally don't know what most of this says, so I don't know how to grade this essay. Like I can't read it. So that's really stressful. And I know they're switching to like computer-based state exams in New York too. So that I'm concerned about for a whole host of reasons as well.
Yeah. Wow.
I guess the thing that I'm really frustrated about is education is supposed to be a science. We are not supposed to just do things without like testing them and figuring out what works best. And I feel like we are just making guinea pigs of an entire generation of students, pushing them onto devices, letting them use smartphones constantly in school and just being like, I guess we'll see how it goes because this, software company is paying us a bunch of money to do this, So that's really frustrating.
Yep.
Like
that's what happened.
We just know that some of this stuff isn't effective. And then some of it, we have no idea because we never bothered to find out before we just implemented it across a whole district. So that's like frustrating to me too.
Yeah. And we were in a time where it was like, more technology is amazing. Like, the kids are going to be so smart. So, okay. How often are the kids doing something they're not supposed to be doing when they have their school issued device out?
I would say it's a little bit less than on the phone when they're not supposed to be, but like games all the time.
Okay.
They're constantly playing games, the free ones mostly, the ones that the district hasn't been able to block yet.
Okay.
At my previous school, I actually made them block Among Us because they would just play Among Us constantly during my classes, and they would even like yell out the join code, and I'd be like, guys, really? Like I'm in the middle of a whatever. So that was really frustrating. So they're constantly playing games, free ones. But then the other big thing is they will be like actually actively watching a movie or a TV show on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, like during class.
Oh my
it's
God.
Really one time, the unit that we did before this research unit that we're in right now is that we were doing Hamlet. And I have like a lot of L students, and my students are extremely resistant to reading. So I was like, you know what? We're going to watch the movie version, and we're just going to do close readings of the text rather than like reading that play just outright. I literally had 2 different students that I had to like talk to multiple times because they were like watching a show or a movie while we were literally watching a movie in class. Like at one point I was saying to them, like, what would capture your attention? Because we're actually watching a movie and you're still just like watching something else on Netflix. Like, what do I do?
Yeah. Well, they grew up with multiple screens. So there would be like, they would have their iPad playing a game and then the TV would be on in the background. And I talk about this with a neuroscientist, Carl Marcy. And we talk about like the second screen and how these kids grew up with that. So that's just like a normal thing to have multiple things going on.
I was listening to a person who works in television the other day, and they were talking about this. They were saying like the notes that they are getting as a screenplay writer or as like a television producer now are like, this is not second screen enough, meaning like you have to make a show where you assume that people are only checking in and out, and that like it needs to be so like action packed and oriented that they're not scrolling, or that they can follow the story when they are scrolling, which is like infuriating.
Wow.
And then also, this is like I keep bringing up to my kids, like the NFL recently made this thing where you can watch like 6 games at once. and I've been trying to tell them like just watch one game.
Oh my God.
Or YouTube has that screen within a screen thing now. So that like these are just the things I'm thinking of where you can have like a video playing in the corner and then you can be like looking for other content while you're just so I feel like our technology is just increasingly even my car, the touch screen has a thing where I can have like my GPS, my music, and then something else, like 3 blocks instead of one. So I just feel like it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah. And everything's getting shorter. Obviously, that's been happening for a long time. But one interview I did with Dr. Gloria Mark and her book, I think you would like, called Attention Span.
Okay.
You mentioned something about like the myth of multitasking, and that was exactly what she was talking about. But she was shared with me that like you go to a movie, like the average time of each shot is like 4 seconds. It's like gotten so short. They have to like clip, 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 clip. Like the jump cuts are crazy.
Yes.
And Blockbusters is like 3 seconds. It's crazy.
And even when I was in grad school, I remember we had to read an article about Cocomelon. They were saying like, don't show this to your kids. The cuts are so quick that it's like really bad for developing attention spans.
Yeah. Really, they recommend that kids under 2 have no screen time. So these shows that are targeted to babies, you have to think twice about that. Yeah. Like, why are we?
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. Have you noticed students accessing anything inappropriate on the school-issued device?
I guess it depends what we're talking about as inappropriate. Like there are some things that I consider inappropriate that aren't flagged by the school. So, you know what? I feel like I almost have to say no because I think that is mostly happening on the smartphones.
Okay.
We do have this thing called Gaggle. So whatever they type into their school issued device or on the school Wi-Fi, you know, if it's a certain key phrase, if it has to do with like suicide, self-harm, or it's something like sexually inappropriate, it will flag the Gaggle system. And then I'll get like a call from the vice principal that says like, hey, you need to check in with this kid or they were doing this. So I know like when we were writing college essays, I was getting like tons and tons of calls because like a really scary proportion of my students were writing about like suicide attempts, that really feels like that has gone up significantly.
Yeah. Well, 30% of teen girls have seriously considered suicide.
Like I did try to talk about sort of the gender differences of what's happening with social media, like how boys are being like radicalized to the right and girls are like increasing suicide and self-harm rates. And they do touch on that in that Social Dilemma documentary. So I kind of tried to do it that way.
Yeah.
I almost feel like in my particular school, they're not accessing inappropriate stuff on the school issued because they're just doing it on their phones.
Okay, sure.
And sometimes by inappropriate, I even just mean violent. Like my kids, for some reason, love like those car accident videos.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, there have just been several times when I've been like, you guys, I know you're like watching this and laughing, but like that's a real person that just got hit by a car. It's not like a hypothetical cartoon.
Yeah. Well, with boys, a lot of the problems come in with the gaming and how much they're gaming, how violent those games are. So they watch all day long. They watch people dying on a screen that look like real people. I mean, the animation is so good. So that's what are they supposed to think?
I think they're being desensitized, and then they'll tell me
totally.
Like, yeah, I'm like, you know, we have a very large Arab population at our school, and I've been having a lot of students telling me like, you know, look at this video of this child starving in Gaza. And I'm like, please don't show me that. I can't look at that. And I'm really concerned that you're consuming that all night long. Like, it's not because I don't want you to care. I very much care about what's going on. It's not that. Yeah.
There's like a new term called cyber trauma, just based off of like the things that they see that they may not realize in the moment are traumatic, but it like sticks with you.
That's really helpful. Okay.
Okay. So overall, for the school issued devices, do you feel like you have control over them in the classroom?
Honestly, no. I think I would need one of those like lockdown browsers or something like that if I was going to have control over them, because then I could sort of like redirect people away from what they're doing and back to the assignment or, you know, things like that. I feel like I don't really have control of them. But yeah, I mean, I think just in my school, it's more the smartphone that is the problem. But still, I don't feel like I can control like what they're doing or whether or not they're watching a show or playing a game.
There is software available. Some teachers talk about like LAN School and other ones where you can mirror to your device everything that the kids are watching at any time and then close it from like your device, which is something that could be useful.
Yeah.
Although then the teachers are like, oh, I just can't spend all day like checking all what they're doing on their devices. Okay. So generally, do you feel like the school issued devices are relied on too heavily or like not enough, or are they being used effectively at school?
I think probably too heavily, because I think school has become a game of copy and paste, and not, even if it's not like another student's work, I'm not like deeply reading about or learning about this thing. I'm just copying the first thing that pops up on Google when I look for the answer, or that so much schoolwork is out there online now, so they can just find the answers without doing anything.
Yeah.
So I think probably too much. Like, I think we are just like moving away from even reading on paper. And sometimes that's a cost issue, but I do think it's being used too much. My district is really pushing us to use ThinkTech.
Okay.
And there are some good things about that particular software, because I can like see what question they're on and be like, why did you log out of the ThinkTech? Like, I can tell that you're on another tab or you're on your phone not answering this question. But in general, the ThinkTech just lets us do things that are probably just better to do with our hands on a thing. Like, why sort words and definitions on a screen when I could print out those things for you and you could manipulate it with your hands, things like that.
Yeah.
It allows them to draw, do polls, things that we probably just could do physically.
Okay. So what does your perfect world look like when it comes to your students and technology in general?
I think it's a computer cart, or a cart in the classroom, where if we're doing something where it makes sense and it's useful, or we're doing research, like, I know that, like, because I went to college and grad school more recently, like, I've never written a research paper by hand or done research, that was predominantly out of paper books in my life. So like, I know that I need to prepare them for college and doing that type of academic work digitally. But I think like we could break that out during the research unit and put it away during the Hamlet unit or whatever. So I think like for me, we don't need these like constant school issued devices. I don't really give homework anyway. I want you doing stuff in class where you have access to me and your SPED teacher and your ENL teacher. So I think for me, it would be like, we've got a computer cart and we can use it when it's awesome and it makes sense. And we don't need it, and you don't need to be on it when we don't have that stuff. I think the phone pouch or something where they don't have access to their phones during class would be ideal. Like, I'm nervous about having to fight with kids to put their phone in that pouch. So I'm honestly like, I think that's the only reason I haven't been like jumping at the chance to get that phone pouch. But I think in general, I just need those put away.
Yeah. I will warn you that I hear students, they'll just bring like a second old iPhone from home and like put that in the pouch. So they use like their dummy phone or something, or their, so.
I got to give them credit that they're smart and they find a way around everything, but they're
so creative.
Yeah.
I know. Does tech make your job easier or harder?
I almost feel like neither. Like, I literally feel like I am, okay, so you know what? Let me say harder, because it's like I'm trying to use it and I'm trying to keep them from being distracted by it. And it feels like the distractions are outweighing the uses of it. I don't want it to be like outlawed and not used. I want them to be prepared for a digital world. Like, I'm finding that I'm having to fight more aspects of it than are useful. So I guess it's making my job harder because it is the norm, and, because they're often using it for things that they're not supposed to be. If they were only using it for what they were supposed to be, I could see it being really useful. That's just not what's happening.
Yeah. And that's the key right there. And one of the themes that I'm going to share is like, if we can't figure out how to give them a device that only does, or let them have access to a device in class that only does the schoolwork and what you want them to do, then I just can't see the value of them having it because they're too distracted.
Yeah.
And that applies to school issued devices as well, because a lot of kids are just playing the games or watching movies on that device too.
Right.
Anything else you want to share on this topic of screens at school?
I think just that I am like watching the quality of education just like plummet. And I'm seeing like things that I did in 4th grade with ease being like extremely difficult and inaccessible for my 12th grade students. And that is really scaring me. And I'm worried that like whatever they end up doing in life, because they're not like learning the skills to put those things and not be distracted away now, that's not going to change when you're in med school. And then that person is going to be my doctor one day. Like I am just terrified for when the world is being run by a generation of people who have half paid attention to everything. And just like the things that are general knowledge, like I think kids are like, I don't care about this. It doesn't get me excited and it doesn't like get my juices flowing. So I just don't care and I don't need to do it. And I think that's being sort of exacerbated by like everything I look at on my phone is provocative and exciting. And like the world is boring. Like, you know, whatever job you end up doing, there's going to be boring aspects of it. And there's going to be, you know, I'm worried about their ability to like sit and focus on absolutely anything. I feel like people are just going to stop writing books because they can't compose more than 3 sentences.
Yeah.
I'm even worried about things like spelling because of predictive text and things like that. And because they're not reading as much, like my students don't know how to spell anything. I think the other thing I'm really worried about is the social interaction. So group work is like more difficult than I ever thought it would be. I think my students feel like, why do I need to make friends with the kids that are in my class or in my cohort or whatever, when I can have friends that I have everything in common with online? So I don't need to bother like trying to make relationships with the people around me because I've got this digital space where this person like really knows me. And then I think there's so much anxiety about making new friends that even when I'm like, all right, we're doing group work, like they just sit there silently and they're afraid to talk to each other and to like branch out at all. Like the amount of kids that are telling me like, I'm too anxious to do a class presentation, I just can't do it, is like going up and up and up. I think there's just so many skills, and I like the world always changes. I'm sure my teachers said the similar things about my generation, but it seems like it's, you know, to a much greater degree now.
Oh yeah.
That things are, you know, like I'm sure there's skills that I don't have that, you know, like the generation before me did, but it just feels like nowadays, like even like the AirPods, like kids are like, I need to be constantly listening to music, even if you're literally giving a lecture. Like, okay, well, fine, I'll just put one in. That is like a really pervasive problem in our school. They won't even take their AirPods out.
Yeah. I've been having this discussion with a lot of teachers is the students want to have an AirPod in,
All the time.
but anything, especially with lyrics, is going to cause them to do whatever they're trying to do, the schoolwork. It'll take longer. There will be more errors and your stress levels increase when you're multitasking.
Yeah, I gave them this research about multitasking. I was like, you guys, I had them do an experiment. And it was do you know the gorilla experiment?
Maybe.
It's like if you can't, you know, your brain can't do more than one attention requiring task at once. So if you are like counting this basketball being dribbled, you won't see the person in the gorilla costume walk by. And I actually found that when I tried to do that experiment and show my students that myth of multitasking, I could tell which ones of them were on their phones because they saw the gorilla because they weren't counting the basketball. And then they were like, oh, I can disprove your experiment because I saw the gorilla. And I was like, you saw the gorilla because you were looking at your phone and then only looked up at that moment. You know?
Yeah. Oh my God, Dean, it's crazy.
So so I think like the socializing I'm struggling with, the AirPods, but I think in general, the smartphones are just ruining the attention span so that even if I give them a mystery novel that's full of murder, like not even something true crime is like interesting enough for them because they can't do long form anything, and that's English class. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dean. This was so interesting. Really, really good stuff.
Great. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. We really need it. So thank you.
Thanks, Dean.